Okay, Gaza War Day 412, Lebanon War Day 66. No end in sight, but I think you guys knew I was going to be here tonight because of the International Criminal Court. My God, they put out the arrest warrants, forcing me to revise my assumptions. I have been what you would call an extreme skeptic of international law in general, much more so since this war, but prior to this war as well. And the International Criminal Court in particular, the International Criminal Court, you guys, I've said it before on here, it is not an international criminal court whatsoever. It is a Western court that is used as a tool by Western countries to dispose of African leaders who have outlived their usefulness to Western powers. That is the function of the International Criminal Court. And things they used to just do by shooting people or hanging them in the field, they drag these African leaders to The Hague and perform this ritual humiliation before putting them in jail, and then a lot of them die in jail. And that's what the International Criminal Court is for. It's an absolute crude imperialist device. And they repurposed it a little bit to go after Russia during the Russia-Ukraine war. So it was Africans, then it was Africans in Russia. And Russia, the West, we know, has a special hatred for Russia. I mean, can we really talk about a special hatred for Russia, Iran, Arabs, Muslims, Palestinians, Chinese, North Koreans, Venezuelans, Cubans? I guess if you have that many hates, Assad in Syria, if you have that many hates, special hates, maybe your hate is not all that special, is it? It's just anyone that happens to be a target at that time. But still, African colonialism, neocolonialism in Africa is what the ICC was. Then they did some tweaks to make it Russia. Mind you, the precursor to the International Criminal Court was the international two tribunals that happened at the same time. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, both of which were operations that the military aspects of these operations were sponsored by the West. In the Yugoslavia case, to break up this multi-ethnic market socialist state into a bunch of pro-Western base areas from which to better recolonize Eastern Europe after the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union, and knowing that they no longer had the protection of the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union didn't exist anymore. So it was a great opportunity to go and destroy Yugoslavia and slice it up. There's a documentary about it called The Weight of Chains. I think the documentarian is pro-Israel, so it's pretty perverse, but the documentary is pretty good. I don't know for sure that he's pro-Israel. I don't want to say that not knowing, but if people know The Weight of Chains and they know the documentary maker, you guys can tell me more in the comments. I thought he did a pretty good job in The Weight of Chains documentaries, citing Michael Parenti and Diana Johnstone and people that are really the people whose books I read on it when I was trying to understand it. I did a Substack on this, I think years ago, called "Why Did They Overthrow Yugoslavia?" Didn't I? I think I did. Okay, so now where am I? ICC. So it was Africa, then it was Africa, Russia, but now you guys. Now it's Africa, Russia, and Israel. And I know they put warrants on Mohammed Daif and Yahya Sinwar, the late murdered Yahya Sinwar. But you know, that's man bites dog, right? That's not news that the Western institutions would demonize and criminalize armed resistance to their proxy. What is news is that the West is issuing arrest warrants for the leader of one of their countries, a member of their own ruling class, the member of their ruling class, the one who can come to America and go before Congress and get unanimous applause from all parties, the one who all the parties in every Western country have to fight over how much they support genocide. And now their own court, the international criminal court that they created to humiliate and dispose of African leaders, has just issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. And guys, I would tell you that I saw this coming, but I didn't. I'm having trouble making sense of this. I'm having trouble making sense of this because you guys probably know from if you've watched these videos before, if you're not new to this channel, that I am inclined to believe that a lot of what we see as opposition and fierce controversy between Republicans and Democrats and between liberals and conservatives is all fake. And that the ruling classes and between, for that matter, England and France, United States and Canada, and of course, Israel and everybody on the West, it's all fake. I'm inclined to think it's all fake. I'm inclined to think that the ruling class of the West or Western countries are very disciplined. They know whose turn it is to feed at the trough. They know whose turn it is to take a step back and be in second place for a while. They know which strategies they want to pursue. They're all blackmailed together. They all commit horrendous acts in private and on video so they can be blackmailed together. They all go to these different islands. They all take pictures together. They all have, put medals on around each other's necks. They do all of these things. So when I see something like the ICC decision, I can't make sense of it. And I'm entertaining theories. Please tell me what you guys think in the comments, because I the only thing I can think of is that they are getting ready to move on from Netanyahu and try to pin all of this on Netanyahu and kind of launder the rest of it. And I don't know if they keep doing what they're doing now, which they, I'm sure, plan to. It's not going to be long before people feel the same way about the new guy, whether it's Smotrich or Ben Gvir or whoever the Katz or whoever the hell it is that replaces Netanyahu to run the genocide. So that's the only thing I can think of that they're trying to prepare, because some very surprising countries have said they were going to follow the law. Canada, the prime minister said, no, we're going to follow the law. That's who we are as Canadians. That's weird. That's a weird thing to say on a day that there's an arrest warrant against the leader of Israel. But they said it. A lot of the minor European countries said it. Of course, the United States, Germany, and Britain all said we don't care what the International Criminal Court says. Some American senator said they call it the Hague Invasion Act for a reason. So maybe the Americans we're gonna end up having the Americans invade the Hague at some point. Maybe a dramatic rescue of Netanyahu with American special forces parachuting into Amsterdam from Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. Maybe the Maccabee fans will come from Amsterdam and they'll all converge on The Hague for a major operation to rescue Netanyahu and Gallant from the dock. There have definitely been more dramatic things than that, so there's no reason to think that can't happen. Okay. So tell me what you guys think is going on, because I don't know what's going on. I've gone blurry. Okay. So I want to talk to you about, there's a couple of reports that I want to recommend. I was listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream, and they had an interview with activists in the Mask Off Maersk campaign. So they did a detailed research project. There's also a research project called the Watermelon Index. I think it's by Progressive International. So check those out. They're really a lot of research is being done into the corporate connections and the military industrial complex and how they all feed into the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Okay, I want to talk to you about some speeches. One of them is Naim Qassem, Sheikh Naim Qassem, the new Secretary General of Hezbollah. And he made a couple of really interesting points in his speech. I think it was yesterday. And he saluted the media spokesman, Mohammed Afif, and who was martyred by the Israelis in Beirut. And he talked about how they hit Tel Aviv. And he said, if you hit Beirut, the response has to be downtown Tel Aviv. And we have to do that. We can't allow the targeting of Beirut without doing that. So they did hit Tel Aviv pretty hard. And I think I mentioned that to Seyed reps ago. So he explained that. He talked about the battle at the front in the south. He said, we thought the fight at the border would be 15 days, but it's been 40 plus days. There were 10 very shaky days after Nasrallah's assassination, but we recovered. He wanted to emphasize this point that the resistance in Lebanon does not operate like conventional armies. We don't prevent them from advancing. We destroy them wherever they are. Really important when you're looking at a map and you're looking at where they are. I have made this point over and over, and I will make it over and over again. You don't get a sense of the war by looking at maps the Israelis produce of where they have gone and where they have blown things up. They have firepower, they have air power, and they like to produce maps and show that they're all over the place. But in fact, that's not what's going to decide the issue, and especially in a war of this type, a war of attrition, a war where the resistance is not, it's not a conventional war. It's an asymmetric war of attrition. The resistance is trying to inflict losses on the Israeli army. And that's the strategy that the resistance is taking. So when the Israelis are engaging in massed fires and massive air assaults and raids and mortar shelling, the resistance just hunkers down and waits. And then when ground troops come or tanks come, they come out from where they were hunkered down, and they begin to destroy those tanks, and they begin to ambush those troop concentrations at close range, or they hit them with missiles when they're gathering and mustering. Naim Qassem said, we're prepared for a long war. And he made a really interesting point about negotiations. He said, we are willing to negotiate. We're always doing negotiations. The negotiation track goes, the negotiation track continues. We're not negotiating under fire, like we're under fire, he said, but they're under fire too. So the logic of the battlefield is one logic, the logic of negotiations is another. The battlefield is an escalatory dynamic. So things are escalating according to their ladder of escalation, and negotiations proceed. But he said, while negotiations are proceeding, we don't suspend the battlefield while we wait for negotiations. And he said, you know, they want us to submit, they want submission from us, but we are not. Far from us is humiliation, which is one of their slogans. And he repeated the conditions that they have, which is a complete cessation of aggression and the preservation of Lebanese sovereignty. He talks about the ceasefire proposal that in the last sit rep I told you was going to amount to nothing. And he said, we are hopeful about it. The Lebanese government gave their comments back to the proposal. We gave our comments back. We didn't publicize our comments, but they're in line with what the Lebanese government is saying. So he's basically saying we are not going to accept something that forfeits our sovereignty. We're not going to give them what they haven't won. This is another thing they always say that Hezbollah also says, which is that we're not going to give them in a negotiation what they can't win on the battlefield. By the way, I have to go back to international law. I guess in between my last sit rep and this one, the United States vetoed another ceasefire resolution. So much for international law. Okay, sorry. Back to Naim Qassem's speech. Yes, there was a really good couple of tweets, analyses by the Middle East Observer. This is an account. I don't know who this is, but Middle East Observer, ME_observer. And they did a really good job, in my opinion. Israel's hidden issue with Resolution 1701, and is Lebanon still linked to Gaza? So it's directly addressing this issue of whether Naim, you can read Naim Qassem's speech as saying that Hezbollah is now willing to separate the fronts. They're not, but they have to talk about 1701 because 1701 is the basis for any future ceasefire. So Middle East Observer basically says, and Middle East Observer, if you're listening, I hope I represent you fairly, but he basically says, they basically say that 1701 actually imposes conditions on both Israel and Lebanon. Israel has never fulfilled their side of it, so 1701 is not being violated by Lebanon because Israel has never fulfilled its end of the bargain. Naim Qassem said in his last speech that Israel had violated 1701 33,000 times in the years since 2006. So by saying let's go to 1701, that would be for Israel to go to 1701. Israel would have to behave very differently from the way it's been behaving for the past 18 years. So that's why Middle East Observer says Israel will continue fighting until it's physically impossible to continue the war. And in this case, the war in Gaza will be ending too. The alternative for Israel is to accept 1701, which includes halting air sorties over Lebanese airspace, which practically means that Israel abandons the idea of future war because everything that happened to Hezbollah during the last 18 years of is due to the last 18 years of air spying. If they abandon this, it means they effectively increase Hezbollah's power exponentially, and this itself is probably a bigger threat than Gaza. I believe the fronts are linked until Israel itself wants to stop the war, and the less costly way would be to stop the Gaza war, which would stop Hezbollah's attacks automatically, and then Israel can leave Lebanon while keeping the air violations, since the implementation of 1701 will be delayed under negotiation. So I think that's a really astute analysis of the situation. I had put it a little bit more crudely in my own sit rep 2 days ago, about where I just said nothing is going to come of this because Israel's non-agreement capable, doesn't accept surrenders, and the resistance axis exists and is not going to be separated and picked off one at a time. Those were my reasoning, but this is a much more sophisticated analysis of 1701 as a document and what it demands of both sides, and how Israel can either comply with that or stop the aggression in Gaza. Okay. How about Malik al-Houthi? Seyed Abdelmalik Badr al-Houthi gave his usual Thursday address, and it was a fiery one too. It was very anti-imperialist. Sounded, I mean, this is the thing about Ansar Allah, right? They're Islamist and they're Muslim, but it's like their outlook, a lot of what they say is very historically grounded anti-imperialism. So Houthi said, he was talking about the West. He talked about how the US was built on the genocide of Native Americans. He said, or American Indians, first indigenous peoples. And he said how any human with a shred of humanity could act with such brutality, is unbelievable to him. He talked about the Security Council. He said how it serves aggression, tyranny, occupation, domination, and the plundering of nations' wealth. He points out that the genocide is an American-backed genocide. He gives some salutes to Qassem brigades in Gaza. They did 24 operations this week. He shouts out Hezbollah. He said they're a shining example of resistance. Iraq resistance carried out 18 operations. He said, our people in Yemen, our operations are ongoing. We're striving to build and develop our capabilities. He made the call to the Million Man March tomorrow, Friday. So what about military issues? Okay, military fronts. In Gaza, there's news of a major ambush, I believe in Beit Lahia. 15 Israeli soldiers were killed at point blank range in one of these ambushes in Beit Lahia. So that's a very big, one of the biggest I've even heard of in the whole war, I think. That's a major one. In the West Bank, there's been a long day of fighting in Jenin again. 770, a group did a report that 770 children have been abducted by Israel since last October 2023. And there's no estimate of children that have been kidnapped by the Israelis in Gaza. So just, I don't know. We don't have words for these kinds of evils, but there's a major massacre in Syria, Palmyra. Palmyra is a major site of historical antiquities, and it was destroyed by the Islamic State, and now it's being bombed by Israel for under the same kinds of interests and not dissimilar ideologies either, I suppose. The Israelis had to fly through Jordan to get to Syria to bomb it. Iraq. Kataib Hezbollah, one of the leaders, the general secretary, I think Hussein al-Hamidawi, he gave an interview, and the interview was really interesting. He said, of utmost importance to us are two matters. One, that we do not leave the Palestinian people alone, and two, that no harm is caused to the unity of field. So this just shows you something of the resistance thinking. All of these speeches give you a sense of how they're thinking about the war, how they're thinking about strategy in this war. And Lebanon front, okay, probably worth showing you this because apparently they've set a new record for how far south they're hitting the Israelis now. So this was apparently near Ashdod. And that's a lot. That's very far to the south. So Tel Aviv is central Israel, but this is Ashdod. This is close to Gaza now. So these explosions are where the operations were. So again, a lot of them are inside Israel on the other side of the border. We have down here, I believe this is Nahariya. Let me see if I can see. Haifa. No, I guess it's Haifa. So this is, but look down here. This is where This is Ashdod, and this is where they hit. So this is 150 kilometers deep into Israel. The deepest so far in this war, apparently. So once again, as I said in my previous sitrep, this is the new normal. There will now be attacks from as deep as that into Israel. There's also a news item of a 70-plus-year-old archaeologist whose specialty was like basically proving that these different Arab lands should actually belong to Israel. And he went to Lebanon without authorization with a military unit and got killed. Like a retiree got killed, trying to prove that Lebanon should belong to Israel. 29 operations, depth of 150 kilometers. The Haifa naval base was hit with a swarm of drones. The Shraga base near Haifa was hit with a drone swarm. There were drone swarms attacking gatherings of soldiers in Shama and Yarun, Shama in the west, Yarun kind of in the center, and gatherings near Khiam, 10 rocket barrages, plus the usual rockets on settlements in the Israeli north. So major day of operations, and they're always doing something they haven't done. They did a big attack on Tel Aviv, and this was just like a deeper attack deeper into South Israel now than they've ever done. So new records all the time that then become the new norm, which leads to, and I'll conclude with this article. There's an article by someone named Qassem, translated by the Resistance News Network. And it was interesting because Qassem is talking about like how might the war start to shift into a lower phase. And apparently the finance minister submitted a 2025 budget, which assumes that the war will be over. The war will be over in Lebanon in 2025. And that Gaza will be so low intensity that it won't be as costly. And why why are these assumptions being made? So we have the economic contraction, the psychological pressure of all the displacement and all the bombs falling all over the place all the time, stagnation on the battlefield, the idea that there's no end in sight, and there's anger over the draft. There's anger and real conflict between religious and non-religious people, Jewish people inside Israel, because the non-religious want the religious people to serve in the army. And they feel like unless they are, it's unequal sacrifice, even though it's not going to make a huge difference in terms of how many men are available to go and commit genocide in these different countries. They're upset because they feel like they're sacrificing their lives for these religious people to go and live in Israel, you know, without this kind of sacrifice. And there's an interesting op-ed that they quote, that Qassem quotes, by Rogel Alfer in Haaretz, who says, "Life in Israel is as worthless as a garlic peel. The system is permitted to destroy, crush, send individuals to death, and sacrifice them if they are abducted, abandon them, and cease to protect them. The blood of individuals here is very cheap. However, let us clarify. The blood of Haredi individuals, that's the religious Orthodox, is worth much more. The sacrifices apply only to others. The fascism here is religious. The blood of non-believers is cheap, and they must be sacrificed to preserve others, the Jewish people, especially those studying the Torah among them." So that's a real kind of seething anger that I detect in that reading of a secular person towards the religious. And from what I've seen, the religious are very much like right back at you, because the religious uh, don't didn't come here to go and fight in the army. They came to Israel to study the Torah and live their Jewish religious life. If you can't live a Jewish religious life, then how is Israel the state of the Jews? Is the question that they ask. We might as well just go be Jews anywhere, which you know, they should be able to do, right? As a religious group that's protected. So all of these issues are wearing Israeli society down. And to circle back all the way to the beginning of this video, they're wearing Israeli society down. In particular, the ICC decision is going to wear the Israelis down. I think Netanyahu called it, or Gallant called it, a dark day for Israel. It is a dark day for Israel. They're the darling of the West, and the West's own criminal court has a warrant for the arrest of their leader, their elected leader, who is worshipped in the West, who bullies the West, who brags about how he says who goes, he says what goes in America. What is going on? Even if the idea was to get rid of, I mean, there's no need to get rid of the court unless the court is going against Israel. So I can't see this as an attack, a multi-step 5D chess move against the International Criminal Court. They're going to have to destroy the criminal court because it's just found against Israel. They're going to maybe even have to invade The Hague. But like, what are they going to say when they prosecute these African leaders now? What a mess. What a pickle they put themselves in. I mean, these legal binds, I guess they matter. We follow the battlefield. We think this is where it's going to be settled. But these things that happen in the law, they're not insignificant. And if it was insignificant, then they wouldn't have struggled so long to try to squash this. And I thought only yesterday I saw a note that they were investigating Karim Khan. And I thought, I see what's going on. They're going to investigate Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the ICC, instead of investigating Israel. But no, the arrest warrants are out now. The arrest warrants are out now. So tell me what you guys think in the comments, and tell me what you think the bigger game is. There's always a bigger game, right? And as usual, like and subscribe. I will see you on the next big day, which, I mean, the way things are going will probably be very soon.